I guess the React team wrote this blog post about React 18 coming out pretty soon, or I shouldn't say that, coming out sometime soon, maybe. It gives a few updates about it. I think the big takeaway is that they created a working group with the community. And so it's kind of, well, it's a working group. You got feedback, you got questions, and you want to collaborate with the team, the React team. This is where you want to go. As far as I know, the working group is invite only, I think. But if you do go to the webpage and you scroll all the way down and you click on that working group, right, it takes you right into the GitHub discussions. And here you go. You can see everything, all the chit chat about what's going into React. If you want to play with it today, what do you have to do with it? And it seems like it's the React team, the whole crew, even from Mark Erickson, the Redux guy. It looks like a couple of React developers there, Girion and Darius. So anyways, this is kind of where you want to go to stay on top of what's coming through with the release calendar of React 18. So keep that in mind. Moving along, if you're just getting started with React, Smashing Magazine is an excellent blog posts. They have excellent articles, pretty much on everything front end, and then some, like web design. But they do every once in a while they come out with a kind of like introduction to React, getting started with React. And this is one I found, building a whack-a-mole game. It's a very long post, but if you're getting started with React, I suggest you start here. It's very good. It's long because it's very detailed. There's a lot of examples, and he slowly builds up a game called Whack-A-Mole. So definitely check it out if you're getting into React. It literally extremely detailed blog post on how to get started with React. And then at the end of the day, you get to play a little game. You get to make this little game called Whack-A-Mole, which you can play at your spare time. But it's a little fun little game to get started with React. Definitely check it out. Also, if you already are doing React, I think even Aidan can probably chime in on this as well. One of the great interviewing questions for front-end development is, hey, can you do a form? What goes into making a form? What comes first, the labels or the inputs? So on and so forth. And so forms are used obviously throughout the web in every possible context. And so building forms is extremely important for a front-end developer. Using a library to do your forms, using something like Bootstraps. But one thing that I like to do in my interviews in the past was to ask developers to just, crank out a form using the form elements and see how far you can get, right? So we had Davis Adia come on the show last month. And then shortly after, I guess before, he posted this post about forms in React, and I think he nailed it. It went through exactly how I like to think about it. I like to think about forms, create forms, how to do your controlled and uncontrolled handlers, your inputs. It's really good, and again, it's a little bit long, but the explanations and the code example is perfect for it. And again, intermediate or advanced, I think knowing how to do forms is so fundamental to front-end development. Just understanding what goes into making a form is super helpful. And this React Forms is how you can make your own forms in React using all the great hooks associated with it. So check it out if you want to up your game or preparing for an interview. This is one of those interview questions that I always pull out. Build a form. going on to the next item here. So I'm a visual learner. And so this game here it's a visual game. You want to move the pieces around, you have to write JavaScript. And so if you're starting off with JavaScript, this is really good, kind of like a game gameplay with writing JavaScript code. I started playing with it for a little bit. It's good. The graphics are awesome. The JavaScript is pretty straightforward. You really get to learn about loops, methods, so on and so forth. But it's one of those things, right? If you're like a visual learner like myself, you need to see things moving. You need to see things happening in the background, how things are coming together. And this is like a little space game, so you can use to practice your JavaScript. Year.io. Check it out. So moving along, so I ran into like a couple of performance posts this month, and it seems like there's a lot of performance measuring happening. And it's all good, right? We have a lot of front end development, frameworks, libraries. They're all trying to compare off of each other, trying to figure out which is best for development, user experience, developer experience, speed, performance. And of course, React is an easy target for that. But this is not one of them. This is kind of like how you can improve your React performance. If you're in the middle of a blog post, or sorry, your application, and you're taking a step back and thinking maybe it's a little bit too slow, maybe taking a look at this, it's a relatively good layout of how to speed up your React performance. But the quick summary, I think these are nothing new, but it's always good to refresh ourselves as developers. Avoid inline functions as much as possible. Remember immutability. Remember hidden components like modals and dropdowns to render them conditionally, and then call multiple APIs parallel. So again, your application obviously is going to be very different, but take into mind that these are kind of general purpose performance enhancements that may or may not help you. And so when I just go through them and check them off your performance checklist, make sure you cover them when you're doing performance testing on your app. So improving React performance, read this blog post. Just covers how he did it, how their application improved by 10x, right? So just add those performance tips to your checklist. Another good performance comparison is with CSS and JavaScript, right? So this is always a good time at after meetup, going to a bar, having drinks with friends. This conversation always piques a lot of interest, right? CSS versus a CSS and JS. It's a relatively short blog post. It comes down to, it's very detailed, a lot of data. At the end of the day, right, the browsers, the more JavaScript the browser has to chew through, the longer it's going to take, bottom line. If you're dealing with a lot of CSS in your JavaScript has to get parsed. That costs, depending on how big your application is, right? CSS and JavaScript may have an impact on your performance. It's great for developer experience, not so great for the end user. But then again, there's a lot of ways to solve this problem as well, using like splitting, like code splitting. And I guess there's also some CSS and JavaScript libraries that actually extract the CSS from the JavaScript and bundle it up in a different file, a .css file. So when it does load up into your browser, right, it's not parsed. The JavaScript engine is not parsing. Doesn't have to parse the CSS and JS. The CSS engine will take care of that. Another way to speed up your performance, your app performance. But something to think about, right? I know there's a lot of diehard fans out there, CSS and JSs for life. just keep in mind, you're not building for yourself, you're building for your users. So check that one out if you're doing performance testing. And finally, a great post I just recently read was JavaScript memory usage. And very similar to the CSS and JS, right? The context here is just pure JavaScript. The more JavaScript you have rendering in the browser, parsing in the browser, the longer it takes for your app to load. Bottom line, it doesn't matter if you're React, a vanilla JavaScript, it doesn't matter if you're Angular, Vue. The more JavaScript you have in the browser, the longer it takes to render. And there, again, this is a little bit more in depth. It focuses 100% or mostly on JavaScript. It does a comparison with React, jQuery, Angular, Vue. If you're, again, performance testing your application, keep in mind that JavaScript, the more JavaScript you have in your application, the longer it takes to load. Again, put that in your checklist when you're doing your performance testing. Just mark it off once you're done. Right? Yeah, you got yourself covered here. There was a library that I really want to test out, want to play with it. It's called Vanilla Extract, and this is one of those solutions to the CSS and JS. Not only that, it kind of wraps it in the TypeScript. So I guess they're running it as style sheets in TypeScript. I'm a big fan of CSS modules, so when I saw CSS modules and TypeScript, I'm all about it. Post CSS, big fan. CSS modules, big fan. TypeScript, big fan. And this kind of just seems a good toy to play with and see how you can use CSS and JS with the code splitting, right? It will extract the CSS from your TypeScript, create a different .css file. So when it loads in your browser, it's not parsing JavaScript. Your CSS is actually a file of its own. So check that out. Vanilla Extract, style sheets in TypeScript. And finally, I know that maybe there's a lot of burnout out there. A lot of developers cranking out long hours, especially now that we work from home. A lot of us do work remotely. Maybe your company is asking you to work extra hours on the weekends because why not? You're at home. What do you got to do? Play Xbox? Come on. So I kind of ran into this, the art of front-end engineering, and I like it. I like this a lot because the longer you do front-end engineering and you don't take a perspective of craftsmanship or appreciate the art that goes into making a web page or making front-end development. And again, not just front-end development here, not front-end engineering. It could be web development in general. There is an art to it. It kind of brings you back to the appreciation of why do front-end work? Why do engineering? And so this blog post kind of goes through that and the kind of walks you through like a fall in love story of front-end engineering. Why you do it, why it's so exciting, the cool things you can do with it. Take a step back from your overburdened, overstressed job, and then work on front-end development as a toy, as a craft, as something to be proud of, something to take time to understand and learn the ins and outs, play with designs, play with new CSS or HTML elements, try new framework, right? So this is kind of like one of those motivational, go back to the roots of why you came into front-end development. Appreciate it, appreciate the art. There's a lot of burnout out there. And so this one kind of brings you back to the center. So that being said, let's get back to the presentation. Aidan, are you ready? Are you?
Yeah, let's do this. Let me pop this guy in here real quick.
I think, I don't know, was there any questions out there? I kind of flip over my screen. Nope, nope, okay, yeah. So whenever you're ready, Aidan.
Yeah, I'm trying here.
Okay.
Oh, I think, oh, okay, cool. It's showing up. Awesome. So yeah, thanks for all the news, Roberto. It's always cool to see what you know, the new stuff that's out there. And I liked multiple times you mentioned like the idea of craftsmanship, and that's kind of where I wanted to go with this talk. Is you know, a lot of times crafts can go so much deeper than you normally are used to seeing on the surface. And you know, as you get more and more familiar with a particular trade, you know, there's more and more nuance. And I feel like accessibility has always been one of those things that people kind of put off as a, you know, as like a deep seated knowledge as front-end web developers. And I think that's yeah, I definitely don't think that that's the way that we should be thinking about it. Like it's a piece of our craft, and we can learn more about it just like we can learn more about anything that we're building. So yeah, I'll dive in here. Accessibility 101. What we will talk about is first, who am I? Then what is accessibility? Why is it important? And then how can we build accessible React apps specifically? But you know, the same kind of concepts could you know, extend to any front end framework or any front end development whatsoever. So just to lead off, I'm Aidan Garza. I'm the principal engineer at Homeward. I've been building React apps since version 0.7. There's my LinkedIn if you want to connect. And a quick plug, we're hiring at Homeward. We just raised a pretty massive Series B, and we need mid-level all the way through principal engineers. So email me if you're looking or if you know somebody who is. But jumping right in, so what is accessibility? You'll often see it shortened to A11Y for the 11 letters between the A and the Y. I wanted to start with a quote by Tim Berners-Lee, who you may know as one of the inventors of the World Wide Web. The power of the web is in its universality. Access by everyone, regardless of disability, is an essential aspect. So from the beginning of the web, the idea was that anybody can use it, and it can empower anybody, including those with disabilities. So going a little deeper, ultimately, accessibility is designing and building technologies and interfaces that can be used by everyone. And here I've just got some examples. Somebody with visual impairment, that could translate into a website being screen reader friendly or having sufficient contrast so that they can actually read it easily. A physical impairment, your site should be keyboard navigable and have minimum touch targets if you're working with a touch device like a phone or tablet. Auditory impairments, you can have captioned video and audio. Neurological impairments, there's actually a media query called prefers reduced motion that you can use to tone down the amount of animations happening on your site. And there's also efficient UI flows. People who have severe ADHD will have a really hard time getting through some of your forms if they have to do a lot of duplicate data entry or the flows aren't efficient. And also technological. Somebody who's on, an older smartphone in a rural area should still be able to access your site. So, assuming that that device memory and bandwidth are just a free-for-all is not a great assumption to make, and we should strive for efficiency. And why is it important? Got kind of 3 points here. One, access to the internet is a basic human right according to the UN, and to most folks, the internet is meant to be to provide free access to information, and everybody should be able to access it regardless of any particular physical or mental impairments, or technological or location. Two, discrimination is bad. I have a classic meme here, just kidding about you feeling bad, but it's something that we should all care about. And as developers, we're kind of stewards of this information and access to this information. So we should care about giving everybody access to the sites that we're building and the tools that we're building. And finally, a big thing, making your app accessible for people who can't use it without the accessible features actually makes it better for everyone. So if you have efficient UI flows with minimal data entry, that will help people with chronic needs or that need specialty input devices. So think about like Stephen Hawking with his cheek cursor that he had. Making a site that's easy enough for him to use is probably also going to make it easy enough for anybody, and for people with temporary disabilities as well, like a broken hand or an arm in a sling or something along those lines. Things like sufficient contrast and supporting color preferences will help people with color blindness and other visual impairments, but it also helps if somebody's trying to read an article on your site in direct sunlight on the beach, or when they're laying in bed in the evening. And let's see, using semantic layouts or making your site screen reader friendly will certainly improve for people who have visual impairments, but it also will help simpler screen reading tools for children or people who have trouble reading, or folks who prefer to listen to content because they have a hard time focusing when they're actually reading. So there's a lot of situations where being or when they need to be hands-free, like if somebody's driving and listening, starting to listen to an article. There's a lot of ways that those tools help everybody. And finally, even under normal circumstances or the best possible circumstances, on a giant monitor in a perfectly lit office when you have quiet around you, having thought through all of these ways to make your site accessible for people who really need the accessibility will make it a better experience for everybody. And there are a lot of assistive, accessibility focused designs and inventions that have made everyone's lives easier, like cutouts in curbs. So now it's not just for a wheelchair. You can get your cart that your wagon that you're pulling for your picnic up the curb as well, or closed captioning, or the typewriter, or audiobooks even were originally an accessibility thing that now we all enjoy. So yeah, make your apps accessible and everybody will benefit. So now that we've kind of talked about what it is and why it's important, how can we make our React apps more accessible? And we've got a few steps here that we can go through. But first of all, a great first step is to discover just how inaccessible or accessible, if you're already there, which is great, your app actually is. And there's several tools, Lighthouse, which is built into Chrome DevTools now, Axe DevTools, which I believe Lighthouse uses under the hood to do their accessibility searches, can be installed separately, have their own DevTools, and even some like CI/CD tools and like automated accessibility testing tools, or even just manual testing. Fire up, every MacBook has a built-in screen reader. Every, most major devices these days have a built-in screen reader that you can enable in your settings and take a little ride through your app and see how difficult it is. If you get frustrated with it, odds are everybody else does too. So let's explore on our trusty to-do list app. We've visited this before in a couple of my previous presentations, but I installed a tool called the Axe Core React library that is really easy to get set up. Just in my index, I did an npm install save dev, and I'm only installing it if we're not in production, or only importing it if we're not in production. And it just adds like a layer into your React DOM that can check for accessibility issues and tell you right in your console. So I fired up the app here, and I've got on the main page 3 issues right away. And this is really great. I can see what the issues are. I can dig into them. If I click any of these links, it's going to open up a wealth of information on like what the error that it's giving me is, many different ways to fix it, why it's important to fix it, any specific like rules or even legal stuff that's attached to it sometimes. And so I've got 3 issues here. Let's see if we can fix them now that we know that they exist. So document should have one main landmark. So if I read through this, you know, I happen to know what the landmarks are, and we can get into that a little bit deeper later. But say at least we need like a main section that calls out like this is the root of the page. So let's go into our app.js, and instead of this being a div, let's make it a main tag instead and use some of that semantic HTML. So now if I come back here, all of my Axe issues are gone. Now let's refresh. I think, that one that one fix solved everything, I guess. I thought that it also wanted an H1. If I get rid of that, what do we have here? Yeah, so one main landmark, and all page content should be contained by landmarks. Okay, well, by adding that one landmark, we got rid of that issue. So great. And this is an example of using the Axe tool, and obviously that was kind of a simple fix. This is a very simple site, but if you were to run through your app, odds are you would have, you know, plenty more rules that you could dig into, or, you know, as you interact with it, other things could come up. And then, you know, there's also, so that was the Axe tool, but there's also, like I said, Lighthouse built in. So you can come into Lighthouse in your Chrome Dev Tools and just have it do just have it run a report on accessibility. And it'll run for you real quick and come back with a list of things that you should address. So this particular site is pretty highly accessible. The main thing that it has is background and foreground colors do not have a sufficient contrast ratio, which is something that's actually very common that most of us don't really think about all that much. But it's specifically saying that this pill right here needs more contrast between the white and the like teal or turquoise color. So yeah, that is those are some of the automated tools that you can use. And just like I did right there, as you're developing, if you have those tools running, if you see an error come up, you can research it. You can learn what you need to improve, make the improvement, and you're iteratively improving your accessibility knowledge and your app at the same time. And you know, that was a very rudimentary example, but we can get in a little deeper. So like I just said, it can easily become a rabbit hole if you try and do it all at once. And so the point of this advice is like, make it iterative. Discover something that's wrong while you're actually working on something, research it, fix it. Now that's part of your knowledge and part of your app. And so I have kind of 3 simple rules here that we can talk through, in addition to using the automated, you know, that kind of approach that I just gave. there are a couple things that you can just keep in the top of your mind while you're building in React specifically that can keep those types of errors to a minimum. So one is use elements properly, and we'll dig into exactly what that means. Second is continuously improve your library. Don't try and do it all at once. Just like I said, let's make it iterative. And then use this automated accessibility testing. So when I talk about using elements properly, there's kind of two parts here. One is there's this thing called semantic HTML that I'm sure we've all at least heard of. And essentially, we have this giant list. It's not even that big. We've got a decent sized list of HTML elements, tags that we can use that are named in a way that we know what their intended use is. And that is really powerful because with this list of just a few dozen tags, each one of them has a specialized purpose. And just as an example here, this random wireframe over here on the right, if we go down this from top to bottom using these tag names that actually exist, we can actually kind of tell what's going on here. We've got a header that's got an image in it, an aside that has a nav menu, a map, and an address. Then we've got a main section that has a first level heading, and then a section that has a second level heading and a paragraph and a button, and then an article that has a second level heading and a video and a paragraph. So like we don't know much about this page. Imagine if all of these were divs, which so many React apps are just full of divs. Imagine if all these were divs, we would have so much less context. And the purpose of these semantic tags is one, so that when you're reading through your code, like we just did, you can, anybody reading the code can get an idea of what's going on there. But two, so it serves that developer purpose. But two, a screen reader now has to do a whole lot less work, or any number of accessibility tools now have to do a whole lot less work to figure out what the parts of your DOM tree are actually supposed to be doing. If these were all divs, imagine the logic that would have to go into these tools to figure out, how to help a user with a particular disability do what they wanted to do. So by using these tools, or by using these semantic tags, we are giving these tools a huge leg up in helping people use our app. And another way that we tend to kind of go astray with awesome frameworks like React and Vue and Svelte and whatnot is we tend to we have so much power in things like click events, where we tend to misuse interactive types of elements. So sure, in React it's perfectly possible to have an on-click event on a span that pushes a new URL or a new entry to your history. But a screen reader isn't going to know what to do with this. A screen reader isn't going to know that this span is actually being treated like a link. And it's perfectly possible to make this setup here with the span link accessible, but it takes a lot more work than just using an A tag, which is meant for this kind of interaction. And the same thing applies all the time to buttons, and the same thing applies all the time to lists. Making everything into a div or a span is easy, and sure, sometimes pretty easy to do. I wouldn't say it's any more easy than it is to just use the proper tags. And we can get away with it because the platform or the framework lets us. But ultimately, if you just use the correct tags, your site is going to be a lot more accessible with a lot less work, and a lot easier to read and maintain as well. So be intentional about your tag choices. And then the last piece of advice was continuously improve your component library. So at Homeward, we have a leave it better than you found it type of policy. So if you touch a file, if you're building a new file, they're building a new piece of functionality with new files, or you have to go back and modify old files, leave them better than you found them. So rather than trying, a lot of people may try to refactor the whole app in one go. But like I said, that's a rabbit hole. You can go so deep and spend a lot of time without actually getting anywhere. So the real thing that I want to impress on you is to try and do it iteratively. And at Homeward, we're building a library of accessibility pattern hooks. And I'll show you an example of those in a second. And then we're implementing those both in one-off components as we need them, and also eventually working their way back to our common components. And the whole point of this is over time, the whole application becomes more and more accessible and easier to make accessible as we do forward development, because it's already built into our shared tools, and we have this library of utilities that we can use to add it to any new things that we build. And we do this mostly as Axe tells us, as we're building new things, that there's something that we need to correct. So here's an example of one of our hooks, use disclosure pattern. So there's this disclosure pattern that's outlined by the WAI, ARIA, the Accessible Rich Internet Applications Standards, where it's basically for accordions. Like if you've ever seen an accordion where you click something and it shows content, and then you can click it again and it hides the content. Here we've got that concept. So this is a hook on any component that has something like this. I can pass in the name of a feature as a prop and whether or not it's expanded initially. And then I won't walk through all of this, but essentially what comes out is based on whether or not it's expanded, we get certain ARIA or ARIA attributes that get passed out as trigger props. And all we have to do is spread this trigger props into whatever the thing that you click to show and hide the content is. And then content props, which is just an ID that can be referenced by the trigger. And again, we can spread that into whatever the content is. And over time, if we want to improve this, we've already got a base to do it. And it also adds the functionality that that ARIA or ARIA specifies, that you should be able to show and hide the content when the trigger is focused and you either click enter or space. So so yeah, this is a great pattern that we've used in building out these pattern hooks that we can improve over time, and that we can easily use in existing components and our common components to make our whole app more accessible. And then the last piece of advice was the automated accessibility testing. So this is a pretty easy step. It takes like 5 minutes to npm install Axe, and then add it conditionally, have it load into your application if you're not in production, or whatever environments you want to include or exclude. And then instantly you have this great information telling you where you're deficient in accessibility that can help you with this kind of continuous improvement over time. And you can even build, Axe even has tools that you can build into your CI/CD pipeline, so that if a certain threshold of accessibility isn't met, your build could fail. Or it can also be integrated with Storybook if you're doing component development with Storybook. So there are a lot of great tools, and more coming out all the time, it seems like lately, for really making accessibility like a first-class priority in front-end development. And yeah, so here are some additional resources. I'll share these slides so everybody can grab these, but the Q University is the place. So these are the folks that maintain Axe. So they've got a great site where you can go and read up on accessibility. WebAIM, which is Accessibility in Mind, is an organization that also has a lot of great resources and tools. And then just directly going to the WAI, ARIA, Web Accessibility Initiative, Accessible Rich Internet Applications site, they have their authoring practices, and it's good to just browse these from time to time. There's so many things that we don't, a lot of us think about ARIA tags and think about, screen readers and making your site navigable with a keyboard. Those are all kind of basic, but there's really so much more that we could be doing to help a lot more people use our apps. And just kind of getting familiar with these and browsing them from time to time can really teach you a lot. So that's all that I had on Accessibility 101. As I said at the beginning, Homeward just raised $371 million, and we are hiring. I need mid-level, senior, principal engineers, only back-end for mid-level, but front-end, back-end, or full stack for senior and principal. And then we are also looking for an engineering manager. So please email me at aidan@homeward.com if you or somebody you know is interested. And at that, I can open it up to questions.
Awesome. Thanks for that presentation.
Of course.
Just to get started, I mean, so I know accessibility is I guess, the elephant in the room in some companies, but do you guys, is accessibility distributed? Is it like a distributed responsibility? Every developer has to know a little bit about it, or do you have like a team or one or two developers that are dedicated to the accessibility improvements of the application?
Yeah, so at Homeward, we've made it and everybody is responsible. We do have, we've got one senior engineer in particular who came to us from Amazon, who actually helped build Amazon's internal tools for making sure that every piece of code that any Amazon developer submits is accessible. And their builds will fail if you don't meet accessibility standards. So we do have like an in-house expert, but we don't, like I said, this is about craftsmanship. We're all here to become better front-end developers or better developers in general, and accessibility is such a huge part of it that we all need to be aware and all need to be increasing our knowledge. So yeah, we have somebody who you can go to ask questions, but it's everybody's responsibility to make the code that they write turn into an accessible experience.
Nice, well said. Concerning like the HTML elements and accessibility and the semantics, have you run into any issues or no? For example, like if you're embedding iframes, do you know if the accessibility devices traverse that boundary into the iframe, or they just skip it completely? I forgot. I worked on an app that we had like, if you talk about callback hell, talk about like iframe hell,
yeah.
4 levels deep. And I never got around to. I mean, do you know any of that? If the iframe does prevent the accessibility device, that boundary prevents it from going inside of it?
As far as I know, it doesn't. I mean, there are a lot of like major companies these days that use iframe like post message APIs to allow third-party widgets in iframes. And a lot of them that I'm familiar with are in industries where accessibility is like legally enforced. So yeah, that's never something that I've personally had to develop for. But as far as I know, when you focus on an iframe, you can the scope of the reader enters the iframe, and then because you can focus on an iframe and then focus back out, just like you can focus into an app and then focus out to the tabs and to the address bar and to things like that. So I think it's just another level that you can go down into.
Got it. Just wasn't too sure about how iframes are dealt with accessibility devices, but something to keep in mind for sure.
Don't see any questions in the chat.
No questions in the chat. Definitely, accessibility is one of those. I mean, I worked at a startup, and we had this conversation as well. It was like a three developer startup, engineering, and then they had maybe like 15 other employees that weren't developers. And because the team was so small, the question comes up like accessibility is important, but do we have enough time bandwidth to dedicate to doing it with such a poor development, I guess, time, right?
Yeah. Well,
At
that's
that
why
point, it's kind of like a trade-off, right?
yeah, well, kind of, but I mean, like that's what I was trying to kind of get out here is like it really is, it can be an easy thing. Like if you're focused on it, it's just like anything. Like if you focus on keeping your directory structure organized while you are building your app, then you're not going to have to go back and do it later. And really, after you've thought it through and have the initial structure, as long as you stick to it, you're fine. And there's a lot of kind of big things like that that we take for granted as just part of the process. Accessibility should be another one of those things that we just, if you make it part of your process, you will get, at least 80% of the way there, right? And that's so much better than nothing.
Right.
And there's, you can always go deeper, but if you just set up, like I said, if you do that, if you install Axe and then address the highly severe, high severity things that come up just as you see them, which doesn't take much time at all, over time, your entire app is going to be way more accessible than most. So, yeah, just if you start with it in mind, it's way easier to maintain than if you try and go back and add it in one go.
Yeah, definitely better to take it under the umbrella and baby step it.
Yeah.
We do have a question from Douglas. The main tool I have used is ESLint plugin, JSX A11Y.
Yeah.
As part of linting. How useful is that? Am I missing a lot?
Yeah, so that is useful for sure. It's way better than nothing because it'll do things like enforce, you having alt tags on images and things like that. And you can kind of tailor exactly how deep you want it to go. So yeah, that's definitely a great tool to have and to use. If you are using that, you're probably still way ahead of a lot of other folks. But yeah, I would just recommend it's with that, it's all down to how much you configure for it to enforce, because the defaults are kind of minimalistic. It helps a lot. Again, way better than nothing, but you can go a lot deeper, but it takes you taking the time to configure it to to enforce the things that, everything that you want to be accessible. So yeah, that's what I would say. So having both is great. So we at Homeward, we have both. We have Axe and the A11Y ESLint plugin. And then as things happen frequently on Axe, we can add them to our enforcement in ESLint so that we make sure that we don't miss them again in the future. So they're a good combination.
Good combination. Definitely. So T. Potter has a question for you too. Are there libraries for accessible components right now that you know of? If I want to just import a library with components, do you know of any libraries that have built-in accessibility in those components?
Yeah, well, I mean, most libraries have support for it. Again, a lot of this comes down to it depends on how deep you want to go. Because if you just use semantic tags and use, I've seen plenty of people use Material UI and not actually use forms correctly. Just have inputs with buttons next to them and have everything like force control with state. And sure, it works, but if you use those kinds of libraries the way that they're intended to use, they'll be way more accessible just out of the box. So yeah, I don't have any suggestions for like specific like component libraries. I know Material UI is pretty well configured, and things like Element UI, which is a pretty popular Vue component library. There are plenty of like form libraries that tend to be really accessible. Yeah, I mean, I honestly, I should do some research on that, because I just kind of it's like focusing on. I've always looked at, do they support accessibility, and not so much is it like baked in. So that's a good question. I can look into that and post in the meetup comments.
Yeah, I think I would imagine that, you know, like Material, like the big component libraries already have it built in. It could be like a selling point to adopt a component library. Is like, hey, we already have it built in. All you got to do is just use the component, throw your colors into it, and we'll take care of the rest.
Again, it comes down to using it correctly, though, because it's really easy to use them, you know, to use the library but not use it correctly, and miss out on all of that great built-in functionality.
Yeah, that's right. Knowing the tool and knowing how to use the tool, two very different things. Awesome. Thanks, T. Potter, and thanks, Douglas, for those questions. Do we have any more questions from the members? I'm not seeing anything. So I guess we can conclude it from there. Aidan, I really appreciate your presentation, coming in and reminding us of the importance of accessibility. I think that's it's a very important topic, but you know what? We don't do it much here in the meetup. I think so thanks a lot for bringing it back up and keeping it in our heads.
My pleasure.
So if you do want, for the members, if you do want to give a presentation to the meetup where you'll be presenting for July, let me know. Send me a message. Send us a message in the meetup. Another thing to keep a lookout in your email box. I'm going to be sending out a survey. Just try to get a feel for everyone's, I guess, perspective on meeting in person, getting back together in some spaces. If your company wants to host, please let me know. We can arrange something so that hopefully, maybe if not July, then maybe like in August or September, we can meet up in a physical location. And of course, Aidan brought up a good idea, is to keep on streaming. So we're going to try to do that this time around, is have a physical location and also a camera on location to stream for those that cannot or will not join us on a. I noticed that there's a lot of new members that are from out of state, so maybe a streaming option will be to a great benefit to them. Anyway, so just keep that keep that email out there. Keep an eye out for that email. I'll be sending a survey out to everybody out. So please give me your input to further improve the meetup. I think that's it. Aidan, any last words?
No, I think I'm good. Thanks for letting me talk again.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks for helping out.
Of course.
All right, folks. Well, we'll see each other on July.
Sounds good.
All right. Have a good night, everybody. Take care.